Call it what it is. White supremacist domestic terrorism. This is Do-Rag Wisdom, folks, and welcome to Y2K 17.09.18. And here's a little quote from Christopher Hitchens. That's Chris Hitchens. It's always the same with these bogus equivalencies. They start by pretending loftily to find no difference between aggressor and victim, and they end up by saying that it's the victim of violence who is really inciting it. Considering his support for white supremacist protesters in Charlottesville, which ended in the murder of Heather Heyer by a white supremacist domestic terrorist, tax evader and birther creepident Donald Trump may have finally stepped over the line with his false equivalency between groups of racists to anti-fascist counter-protesters. For me, the creepident Trump stepped over the line a long time ago, especially when he refused to accept the presidency of Barack Obama, claiming that the latter was not a natural-born citizen of our country, thus giving rise to the cursed birther movement that I spit on every moment I have a chance. It has been obvious to me from that time until the present that our country has placed into power right now a racist slime who stands against every value we as Americans are supposed to represent. The fact that this creep is still offending us with his administration and not impeached, even after the events of Charlottesville, bodes ill for our country's future. Donald Tax Evader Trump is a master of fake news. And the fact that he uses that term to attack the press is an act of low-life doublethink that Orwell would marvel at. So when heroine Jamil Hill comes forward and finally has the courage to call the creep Trump for what he is, a racist who surrounds himself with racists, the master of fake news has the audacity to demand her removal from her post as sports commentator at ESPN, even though she made her comments on her own time and in her own social networks. If ESPN decides to fire Ms. Hill, I will boycott them and encourage others to do so as well. Ms. Hill has finally done what others before her should have. She has given name to an internal threat to our country, white supremacist domestic terrorism, and has branded the creep in the Oval Office as the racist apologist that he is. Just like no one should be afraid of using the term Islamic extremist terror, we should be just as diligently outspoken against white supremacist domestic terror, which has been a curse in our country for 2 centuries. And we must cleanse our honorable name and impeach this Trump hate monger before he succeeds in destroying our nation forever. Why do I personally agree with Jamila Hill? Tax evader birther Donald's father was at best a KKK supporter and at worst an actual member. The Trump family routinely discriminated against black people interested in renting apartments in their buildings for years. Tax evader birther Don Trump would have had the Central Park Five lynched and murdered without trial, even though it turned out they were all innocent except for being of color. The cursed Trump campaign was begun on the foundations of hatred, from birtherism to xenophobia, especially against those nations where there are mostly people of color. Mexicans were branded as rapists and murderers, while folks from mostly Muslim countries were branded as terrorists. I guarantee if the immigrants all wanted to enter our country were all from white Eastern Europe, they would be welcomed with open arms. Just ask Melania. I'll never, ever forget the images of racist assault I saw televised during tax evader birther Trump's campaign rallies. The image of a black man being violently elbowed by a cowboy beheaded Trump supporter, and an anti-Trump black woman protester being surrounded by other Trump supporters and being shoved while being called the N-word, will always be burned in my memories. The Trumpists want to bring back the days of murder, lynchings, and other white racist domestic terror that was perpetrated on the black communities in our country, especially in the South, for 100 years after the end of the Civil War. I'll never forget what was done to an entire people just because they are who they are. And I'll never allow the GOP and the Trump racist creeps to bring white supremacist domestic terror back. As Ms. Hill so rightly pointed out, Trump has surrounded himself with a bucket full of white people, except in part for the house slave, Dr. Carson, who knows little or nothing about his very important cabinet post, but toes the Trump racist line along with the rest of his deplorables. This cursed cabinet will participate in the destruction of every single Obama-era policy, including the protection of our public lands and the protection of the rights we hold dear as American citizens. This cabinet does not want to make America great again, except if they can make it white again. I have news for these creeps. There are more people of color on our planet than there are pale people. And if the pale people had spent more time being humanitarian than with being religious extremist imperialists, we probably have a better world today. I praise Jamil Hill and hope that she continues her fight against the scourge of racism in our country, and to never be afraid to call this scourge what it is: white supremacist domestic terrorism, and to call out its titular leader, the birther fiend, the tax evader Trump, and to impeach him now and forever, if for anything, to get our national honor back.